Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. Hope everyone's doing good. It is Friday morning at 11:17. So yeah, I want to welcome aboard. Got some new subscribers and a bunch of people who have been part of this lunacy of a channel. Have been commenting. I really appreciate all the people commenting on the videos, and super cool. Really appreciate the love. It's all about sharing ideas. And again, I like this just this week through responding to comments and stuff. Was turned on to a couple of movies that I never heard about before. So it's that thing, like that exchange of ideas. And one of the things that I try to do, I guess you could call it, if anything, I would say if this channel, for instance, if Film Fanatic has any kind of agenda, it would be to simply just maybe shed some light on movies that I feel people don't talk about enough. Movies that I think are these super underground gems. And it's all about, if I can bring those to the table for a couple people to check out. Maybe they never heard of these films. They might, have, you know, saw it once and then it fell into obscurity. And never heard of it. And a lot of these movies, when it comes to the exploitation films, a lot of these movies are not really talked about enough. So that's really, if anything, like when I use the word agenda, that would be the closest thing to that. So, but I love that interaction and discovering some new things. For me, I'm always discovering new movies. I've always had a certain kind of curiosity when it comes to things in art. So I'm always trying to seek out new things. I always go back to the decades or the genres that I feel, I guess, most at home with. But I'm always, trying to check out new things because I never believe that there is, this thing or like a where you cap everything off and just continually say, well, there's nothing really good coming out now, or this or that. And I spend a lot of time covering a lot of these grindhouse movies, which are my favorite. But and I think that period, especially the time of the grindhouse cinema, is definitely that time has passed. And you know movies like that are not really made now, but their influence is, the I see it more and more. I see it a lot more in films these days, and a lot of the great films that came out last year in 2024, I think were really inspired by a lot of these, real sleazy classic, underground films. But the that particular form of style, that those particular decades, with these super low budget movies like that, that time has gone. But right now, within the last 10 years or so, and right now especially, I think it's if anything, it's gotten more ramped up. If you're a collector and a fan of this stuff, it's the it's kind of the best time to be alive. Like it's pretty amazing. So I'm always going back to those classics, but then I'm always trying to check out new things. So today's show, and again, I like to try to bring variety to this channel, cover some new things, and yesterday, actually, I recorded the video yesterday, and I just uploaded the video, and it's on. It's a video that I think is on a movie that I think is just legendary, and that is Doctor Butcher, M.D. I just uploaded the show on this movie. There's two versions of this film too. I uploaded. There's a an American version, and then there's also the Italian version. Dr. Butcher MD is the American dubbed version, which is still amazing. And this was, well, the original title for this movie was Zombie Holocaust. And I haven't seen it in a really long time, and I just started watching it. Or I just realized I have it, and I was going to start watching it last night, but it was on the later side. So I'm going to finish that up in the next couple of days, and there'll be another show. But there's two versions of this film, so I'm really excited about bringing that to the channel. And the other thing that I said about in this review for this movie is that there's hours of special features. It's unbelievable. There's two discs. There's two different versions of this movie. Dr. Butcher MD on one disc with a shit ton of special features, which is the American version, and then the original version, Zombie Holocaust, which is the Italian version. There's a version of that film on this collection with English subtitles. It's all in Italian, but that disc also has a shit ton of special features. So this is one of the best Grindhouse. This is one of the best releases I think Severn's ever put out. This movie was so hyped as being one of the most graphic and kind of vile exploitation movies, and I think it totally lives up to that reputation. So check out the review for Dr. Butcher MD. It's such an amazing film. I saw that film. I don't think I talked about it in the video, and I kind of forgot to talk about it. But I have a long history actually with this movie. I saw Dr. Butcher MD when I was a kid. I remember I was a little kid, and I was staying over my uncle's house. I was like sleeping over his house or something. And I remember, and this was back, and I was really, really young, but I remember this was the time during, the VHS, thing. So, and I remember my uncle always loved, horror films, and I got into horror films because of my mom. So my uncle was always into horror films too. And he liked a lot of horror films, like the schlocky horror films of the time. And I remember one of the tapes that he rented was Dr. Butcher MD, and I saw it at a really, really young age, and it fucking terrified me. It gave me nightmares. And I was thinking about that when I was watching this the other night, you know, and I saw it after I had seen, like what most American kids, when you're first exposed to slasher movies or first exposed to horror movies, those movies were Friday 13th, and then, got obsessed with the entire franchise, which is still my favorite franchise of all time. But I remember seeing the very first Friday 13th, and also John Carpenter's Halloween, and then also the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Like, those were regular staples of my youth. Those were the first kind of horror films that I ever saw, and slasher films. And then that evolved. And then around that period, I saw some Lucio Fulci films. I remember seeing House by the Cemetery at a really young age. I remember seeing some Dario Argento films at a really young age. Tourist Trap. So I got exposed to a lot of these great, sleazy, low budget, trash exploitation horror movies at a young age. But when I first got exposed to these movies, it was, Friday 13th, and also Halloween, of course, and the Nightmare on Elm Street films, and I love those, and they're still classics to me. One of these days, I got to get around to rewatching the Nightmare on Elm Street films. I haven't done any reviews on any of those movies, and those are classic. But I remember when I saw, I would say, when I saw Dr. Butcher MD, it had a whole different effect on me. I remember, because I saw it at Well, I probably saw it at too. I was probably too young. I was kind of a kid, but it had a whole different effect on me when, as opposed to when I saw Friday the 13th and Halloween. Like Halloween scared me. I remember seeing that movie and it felt really real in a lot of ways, but it scared me. But it was thrilling. It was exciting. The same thing with the Friday the 13th films. I knew they were like they were fake. And the same thing with Halloween. I had a sense that this was entertainment. It wasn't real. But I remember when I saw Dr. Butcher and I saw it, maybe, a couple of years after those movies and especially, the Nightmare on Elm Street films. But when I saw Dr. Butcher MD, I think it terrified me and it gave me nightmares. I remember I couldn't sleep that night when I saw it. And I was thinking of that experience and why seeing this movie, seeing Dr. Butcher MD was such a much more like primal or just more of a terrifying experience. And I think it's because the way this movie is shot, it just feels like it's super schlocky and silly and goofy, but it also feels so real. Like it feels kind of like a documentary. And the kills and the gore, are super graphic, and it just felt like everything you're seeing is kind of real. And I think that's what scared the shit out of me. So it was an amazing experience. So that's been one of the greatest aspects of getting older and being a collector of films now, because I've been buying a lot of movies that I saw as a kid, and then kind of realizing part of it's nostalgia, but a lot of these movies still hold up and they're amazing. I mean, for instance, Dr. Butcher MD, it's amazing. I actually enjoy it more now, and I think it holds up even better. It's wild because that doesn't always happen when you see something, in a certain kind of time span. But as far as like other topics and other sideshows, I'm always thinking of new ideas for videos, of course. One of the things I thought about was talking more about the grindhouse, cinema, those, amazing decades. But then, I've talked about a lot. I obviously talk about a lot of those films that were, you know, everywhere during that period, those decades, the 70s and 80s. But trying to maybe do some shows of where I'm going to talk about kind of the maybe from more of an industry kind of perspective, because one of the main reason I started really thinking about that is because of this beautiful collection. Like I said, Dr. Butcher MD. There's some amazing, just incredible, you know, documentaries and interviews with all kinds of people that were, directly involved in, and that they, were a part of the grindhouse cinema time period. So I'm going to do some shows. Well, I'm going to cover some of the industry happenings, people that were involved in like the distribution, and so it'll be fun. It'll be fun and interesting, hopefully. So today's show is going to be on the legendary Terry Levene. He was the founder of Aquarius Releasing. They are Aquarius was a distribution company, and they were responsible for so many. They had this Aquarius had this like reputation of like the supreme peddlers of sleaze and exploitation. Like they were, you know, kind of the one of the biggest companies that marketed and released all of these films, particularly in New York City on Times Square during the Grindhouse era. And there's an amazing interview. He just passed away. Actually, he passed away in last year in February at like 90. He was 90 years old. Fascinating guy, fascinating interview, and I, didn't know all that much about him up until this point, but I figured this guy, Terry Levene was, just, he was such a kind of acted as like a backbone or the foundation for so many of these like sleazy, grindhouse movies that I just love and that I own. So I figured I would talk about him and give him his proper because pretty fucking cool. And looking up and hearing him talk about all of the movies that he was responsible for is just unbelievable. During his time, he released the company Aquarius. They released dozens of B movies in the grindhouse theaters in the '70s and in the '80s and beyond. He worked right up until he passed away.
Powering on.
After working at Commonwealth United, Levine started Aquarius Releasing, which released genre films ranging from kung fu to science fiction and beyond, to serve as a sub distributor for the iconic Roger Corman, which is super amazing. All of the films that he was responsible for releasing is kind of staggering. I mean, you have films like Silent Night, Deadly Night, uh, Black Moses of Soul featuring Isaac Hayes, Lucio Fulci's The Beyond, one of the greatest. I've I've talked about that movie so many times, and I did a special show where I kind of feel like The Beyond might be pound for pound the greatest horror movie ever made. And Lucio Fulci's like, as far as horror directors, definitely my favorite. Legend. They also, when it was released by Aquarius, it was it was retitled, which is kind of crazy. Seven Doors of Death. The other films that he distributed and booked were the infamous sex film Deep Throat. Crazy. That movie was like a phenomenon. I mean, it's a porn, but that was, I believe, it was like the most successful. It had this like, super commercial appeal, even though it was like it's a porn, but it was kind of a legendary film. Um, he was also played a big part in the release of Halloween and John Sayles' Alligator. And and he talks about like in the tradition of other exploitation films, like William Castle, one of the legendary directors during this time. They would, when they had the release, and one of their big releases obviously was Dr. Butcher MD. During the actual premiere of the movie, they would pass out barf bags to the audience. I mean, just that's just so fucking wild and amazing. One of the coolest things about this whole interview with Terry Levine is how he talked about basically getting a chance to see Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween, before anyone else was involved, or before anyone basically saw it. Just wild. Like through his dealings, his partnerships, and Terry Levine had a pretty serious relationship, and he was a business partner with Mustafa Akkad, who was the producer of the original Halloween, 1978, and they had a partnership, and they had this joint partnership to release Halloween. And Terry Levine talks about in the story how, Safa Akkad had gotten basically a copy of Halloween, and he told him, basically, you should check this movie out. This movie is going to be a phenomenon. This is like, an iconic movie. It's going to make us a shit ton of money. And so Mustafa Akkad gave Terry Levine a copy of Halloween, and he talks about the whole experience, like really wild, really interesting, where he basically, he got a copy of Halloween and sat in a little dark TV room with like one or two other people. No one else in the world had yet seen Halloween or had even heard of it. And he said that he sat there and watched it, and he said his first impression of it was that all he could see was dollars. Like he's gonna make a shit ton of money off of this movie. Really, really funny. And then of course the movie came out, and geez, one of the biggest, one of the most one of the most legendary slasher movies of all time. But what an interesting person Terry Levine was, and was responsible for so many of these movies that were coming out. And especially during the time of 42nd Street in New York City. I mean, for over 10 years, just peddling all of these nasty exploitation movies, and just amazing. What an amazing time period. So yeah, check him out. Any of the movies. I mean, a lot of these movies, his companies are responsible for. So I felt like it would be really interesting to talk about him, and talk about the world of exploitation in from a different angle, as far as like how, behind the scenes, how these things worked and how these movies got put out and released and distributed. So very, very cool. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.